We're going to continue our last lecture about types of connections in the steel elements. On the previous lesson, we discussed about several types of connections, and also in general, we discussed about steel constructions, the area of application, and so on. Today we'll start deeply discussing about the main members being joined, the classification, and so on. If we'll start talking about classifications of steel connections, it is also commonly made to the structural members that they are connected. So in fact, the consideration of connecting columns and beams should actually act as one of the primary consideration when needing to design a steel connection. So on the slide you see the most common configurations, which I include. First of all is a beam to column connection, beam to beam connections, column to column connections, and column base plate connections. Generally, full strength beam to column connection designed to ensure the plastic hinge formation in the connection or in the beam, the avoiding of deformations, avoiding plastic deformations of the vertical columns. So all the components of the connection can influence the behavior. So the end plate of connection, like what you see on the picture, extended or extended with the stiffness, end plate thickness, it is bolt diameters, compression or tension stiffness, web panel to the column, and also the shear stiffener on the web panel to the vertical column. Commonly, connection actually is designed or design based on the loads, so at the ends of the beam. So and it is requires to take the strengths, types, and size of all elements of all fastening elements, base materials, so to into the consideration while the connection is designed. So all that parameters should be taken into account during the design of the connection. So the minimum length of connection angle should be at least half of the beam clear web depth. So it is very important, at least half of the beam clear web depth. So there are various standard size of bolted frame connections along with their capacity, provides the codes and normal local normal forms and regulation norms, because the purpose of standardized connections is to increase the speed of the design and in general the speed of construction. So if I will talk about recommendations, to use minimum connection sufficient to withstand the applied load, it make to design as economical as economical as it possible. So it is the maybe main task. It is the main and important part of the design at all. Column to column connections. So column to column connections is also called often called like splice, column splice, and they are really very common, can meet in the steel structures. So in order to avoid the interference with beam to column connections, as shown on the screen, so the column splice is raised higher. So one of the most important steps for connecting two columns is the central line. So central line should be in both of the columns located it in the one place. So only in that it will assure that the load from the top column is transferred properly to the bottom column and down to the footing or foundations. But if we'll look through the documentations in our country and also in the post-Soviet Union countries, we can find many various variants of connections, splice connections, but on the territory of our republic, we can say that there are no requirements how should be done column splices. And when we start using the Russian ghosts, so rules, there are shown some tables and some pictures which give some information about connections, and some of them are like shown in this slide, and some of them with special plates. And so there are often discussions during design in our regions, in our country, how to right design the steel connections, like a splice connection or connection with the steel stiffness, with the stiffnesses. That's an open question, and there are many sometimes problem during design and after finishing construction, after finishing steel production, and also on the plants which have a deal with the production of the I-beams, the welded I-beams, and if sometimes they apply the splice, column splice, it also generate many questions from the customers and from the representatives of the customer who are actually know that there are a little bit information in our country about the connections of column to column and how it should be done. That's why the most and the very interesting questions for our country it is to make maybe or to design our own regulation norms and documentations how to connect constructions between each other, because there are really short information in our country about connection, column to column connection. Column base plate connection. spaceway connection. So it is connection um, which are used when we design the column foundations with the steel with the general steel columns. So in this case, this connection transmit the vertical and not only vertical but also lateral loads on the building frame to the soil through the concrete foundation. When the connection is subjected to actually connection is subjected to vertical and the lateral loads. The column base resists the flexural moments by the increasing by the development of compressive and tensile forces. So it is most of the popular type of connection for industrial buildings, for the cellar beams, and for buildings and structures with a large span, without any walls, without any vertical constructions, and just only space construction. When there are space construction, so this connection can be applied. Uh, about type of connections. It can be used the fabrication shop. So in the construction, generally use several types of the shops um, of the connections. It is fabrication shop, field, and also a field can be generally divided into two main parts. It is welded and bolted. If we'll talk about fabrication shop, it is designed like a fastening method to some special equipment for special designed constructions and also for fabrication methods. The field connection, it is connection which are produced on the site of construction. Uh, Sometimes it can be not only bolted but also welded connection. But we know that welding is welding are not so maybe according to the quality if we will compare with the shop connection not so better because there are many additional impacts which can make it impact during it will be during its production. So that's why it's just a cold weather, the wind, rains, and so on. So that's why um, field welding is not so popular type of connection for steel constructions. Uh, like it will compare it with the bolted connection. Bolt connection is very easy and also it is a desirable type of connection on the construction site because there are no environmental impacts, there are no special recommendations and requirements for it. Just you need to have additional tools which will help you to connect it very quickly, actually. So structure strength depends on proper use of connection methods. Connection made in fabrication shop are called fabricate shop connections. So connection made in fabrication shop call it shop connections. It's easy actually. Field connection is a connection which are created by the steel erector on the construction site. is field connection. Bolting and welding may be used for shop connections and the field connections. So according to the responsibility of the constructions, the designer, architects applied the methods of connections and types of connection. So if the building has the higher responsibility, and of course it should be applied only shop connections. But sometimes there are no variants like just only use the field connection, because not all connections can be done on the special designed shops. So bolting, as I told you, that two most often useful types of connection, it is bolting and welding. In general, the connections, it is the most responsible part of all steel design. So if there will be problems with the connection, or not right design, or not sufficiently enough bearing capacity, it can lead to the big problem for all building, not only for this structure where it was poor designed connection, for all structure. Because in steel buildings, each of the connections is responsible for us, and they are connected which is other by the frame. So that's why it is very important to write applying it. So structural bolting. As you see on the picture, when the crane operator is gives to the construction height the beam which should be connected with the column, of course the rush should be used the special prepared specialists who have the good preparation for connecting it. So the welding erectors, for example, should have the higher qualification if will be applied the method of connection like welding. But if the rush should be applied bolting, it should be also installed in the special step by the special step. So as less the rush should be applied to bolts for per connection before it will be fixed to permanent stage. So it is at least to because should be checked the verticality and horizontally of the construction. Um, there are by using the geological equipment will be checked the height of the beam, and only after checking all needable parameters will be applied the hosting method, and will tighten it all bolts. So and it will fasten it according to the requirements from the drawings and recommendations. So there are many bolt types. So bolt types is that what should be taken to account during the only beginning design the steel construction. because each bolt has its own characteristics according to the steel mark of the steel, the quality of the steel, the the characteristics on tensile characteristics and the compressive characteristics and so on. So most of all there can be found information which are written into the bolts during production. So there are many bolt types, installation methods, joint types used in the structural steel connection. So bolts also make the architectural expression. So it means that if there are no special requirements should be applied bolting or welding connection, so sometimes architects apply the bolting connection according to the architectural expression because it creates some interesting internal design and it gives opportunity to realize architectural imagination about the um, space constructions, about huge steel size, about simplicity of the steel constructions and so on. So there are many expressions which can be used by architects just by applying the bolt connection. So I told you during production of bolts, there are information about it on the head of the bolt. So and there are some letters and numbers. So for example, A307 tell us that is a low carbon steel. So low carbon steel is a not so popular carbon bolts in construction according to the low bearing capacity. It can be used not for main construction, just for secondary constructions. Next one, 325. It's a high strength medium carbon steel, which showed on the left part of the picture. This type of bolts is the most common type of bolts which are used during the design steel constructions. And the right one, A for 190. So it is higher strength heat treated steel. Higher strength heat treated. So actually it's a higher strength, but it also after its production was heat treated. And it is this process, this preheating processes is increased the quality of the construction and increased bearing capacity. It became more stronger. Common bolt size. So according to the bolt size should be done openings in the steel plates and also number of that openings. In general, the bolt size is the measure which are takes from the design of the connection. So in your course project, there are will be tasks to calculate the connection between two beams to find the number of the bolts, the size of the bolts, and the diameter of the bolts. So approximate diameters applied in the construction is the shown below you can see that the bolts with the mark 325 and 490 can be found in diameters ranging from 20 millimeters to 40 millimeters. The most common size 20, 24, 26. And in this case, the highest strength bolts commonly available in the length up to 24 millimeters. Washes. So bolting actually connect of some pieces, and one of important of them, it is not only head but also the washes. So hardened steel washes used in many structural connections with the main aim, it is spread pressure from the bolt tightening process over the large area. So it is spread pressure. Also, it used to cover the oversized or slotted hole. So sometimes holes, according to the class of the construction, can be done sometime more than the size of the bolt. So in that case, it also washes are very important. Flat washes. So it's you can find it on the right part on the pictures. Flat washes. It is washes with the permanent thicknesses at all its surface. And tapered washes in the left part used when the surface being bolted has a sloped surface. So when the surface is inclined, can be applied the tapered washes with the angle which equal to the inclined surface. So actually it's designed as a special for the construction when you know the angle of sloped surface. It can be as flange, channel, or S-shape. So there are several requirements about number of the washes. For example, the bolt with A325s require a washer under the element, so like you see in the picture, head or not, being turned to the tightening the bolt, shown under the nut above the right. So it can be used not only near to the nut or head of the bolt, but also from the opposite parts of tightening construction. So like you see here. And the bolts of 490 require as a washer under the bolt and also the under the nut of the bolt. So in two parts, not only from one part, but from the two parts. If you have a questions, you know that you can answer, okay? Because it's not only my speech, it's not a monologue, you know it. Okay, the main parts of the bolt assembly. So the head of the bolt, the nut of the bolt, and the washer. So the washer in the previous slide, we told that washer can be installed for bolts with the mark A325 in case when it needs just only near to the nut or near to the bolt. But the bolts with more higher quality, for example, A490 should be installed in both parts, like near to the head and also near to the knife. So this is a total length of the bolt. This is a thread part of the bolt. So the thread part, the length of the thread part depends on the thicknesses of the elements which should be connected. There are also grip part. So grip part, it is distance between the head and to the washer. So the grips actually is distance from the behind the bolt head behind, actually, not this part behind part, and to the back of the nut or washer. Do you have questions about the main parts of the bolt?
No.
Okay, I think so. That's not so difficult. All elements, you just can write in your copybooks the main elements and make the simple scheme of the bolt. Just to know the main parts: head, nut, washer, thread, and grip. Bolt joint types. So there are two main bolt joint types. It's a bearing. So bearing, the load transferred between members by bearing on the bolt. So and the slip critical, the load transferred between members by friction in the joint. So the first one, it is rigid connection, and the second one, it is the semi-rigid connection or non-rigid connection. When in rigid connection, it transmit by the bearing in the bolts because they are rigid through the bolts, and in the slip critical through the friction between the joints, between the bolts in the joint of connection. During using not right designed or not sufficiently enough quality of the stiffness elements or in the bolt, there can be find some problems and failures in the nodes. So what you can see, there can be finding the bearing fracture, bearing yield. Also, this bearing yield can be found in the bolts and the fracture in the bolts. So yielding, which an elastic deformation in the left. An elastic when the size are increased, the thickness are changed, and so on. And the second fracture, which is failure on joint. So tension connection acts similar to the bearing connection. Bearing joints. So bearing joints, here is the principal scheme of the bearing connection. So bearing joint is connected elements are assumed to slip into bearing against the body of the bolts. So you see the direction of the forces which acts to the bolts in opposite side to the central of the bolt. There are 1 minute, okay. So this joint is designed as bearing joint. The load to transferring through the bearing with the bolts installed in snap tight or pretension. I think we'll not finish this lecture today because there are many slides. We'll discuss it on next lesson. We'll continue discussing this presentation next lesson because we need to finish the bolting connection, and then we'll start talking about welding connection into the steel constructions. Okay, after